The rain was already falling when the call came in. Hard, relentless, the kind of downpour that pounds the streets like an angry drummer who doesn't know when to quit. I'd been staring at the cigarette smoke curling against my office window, wondering if the night had anything left to offer me besides silence when the phone cut through the haze. A locked room case. They said it like it was just another puzzle in the city's endless supply of dark amusements. But I knew better. Locked rooms never came easy, and when they did come, they dragged you into places you didn't want to be. They called it my toughest night. They weren't wrong. The case came to me with the urgency of something no one could explain. A man was dead in a room sealed tight. No doors forced, no windows cracked. A corpse in the middle of four walls that shouldn't have allowed death to enter, let alone escape. To the brass, it was impossible. To me, it was personal, because when the impossible knocks, a detective answers whether he likes the guest or not. The victim was a writer. Name of Henry Cole. 38, quiet life, no enemies on paper. But the city doesn't let a man breathe that easy without charging him interest. His publisher swore he had been on the verge of his best work, something that would change the game, whatever that meant in literature. All I saw was a man whose life had been snuffed out in a room that made no sense. What was at stake? Everything. A killer outsmarting the room meant he could outsmart the law, and if he could do it once, he could do it again. But what really made my stomach tighten was the whisper I caught from the first officer on scene. He said Cole's final manuscript had vanished, gone without a trace, and something in his voice told me it wasn't just about art. I knew right then this wasn't a simple killing. This was a performance, and the curtain had just gone up. I pulled on my coat and headed into the storm. The house was a Victorian shadow, all sharp edges and wet bricks gleaming under streetlights. When I stepped inside, the air was thick with the smell of wet wood and stale ink. They hadn't moved the body yet. Cole lay slumped at his desk, head tilted like he'd fallen asleep mid-thought. Only the dark pool beneath him told the truth. His hand still clutched a fountain pen, as if the last thing he wanted was to let go of the words. No forced entry. No broken locks. The windows sealed from the inside with old iron latches that hadn't been touched in decades. The kind of security a man keeps when he's afraid of something getting in, or maybe of something getting out. I checked the door. Triple locked. Bolt still in place. The officers swore they'd broken it down themselves, which meant by the time they arrived, the killer was long gone. That's when I noticed the first crack in the story. On Cole's desk, next to the half-finished glass of whiskey, there was a single playing card. The Queen of Spades. No deck in sight, just one lonely card laid face up, like it had been left for me. The room was a box of silence, but silence has weight if you listen, and something about the way the papers were stacked too neatly on the shelves told me someone had touched them, rearranged them, maybe even stolen something. Then I saw it. A gap. A missing row in his journals. The victim was a writer. He had hundreds of notebooks, but one section was stripped bare. Someone wanted his words as badly as they wanted his life. I leaned closer to the body. His face was pale, frozen mid-thought, like a man who'd been interrupted in the middle of a sentence he never finished. His left hand rested palm up on the blotter, stains of ink, smudges of graphite, a writer's hand, but on the tip of one finger. Blood. Not just from the wound. Fresh. Like he'd tried to leave me a message but never got the chance. That's when I heard it. A floorboard creak behind me. The neighbor stood in the hallway, dripping wet, eyes wide like she'd walked into a nightmare she couldn't unsee. Name was Evelyn. Said she'd lived next door for 5 years. Claimed she'd heard nothing that night, not a sound. But her hands were trembling, and her eyes kept darting toward the body like it was about to rise. She swore Cole was a recluse. No visitors. No late-night company. Just him, his books, and his typewriter. But when I asked if she knew about his missing manuscript, her lips pressed shut like a vault. I leaned in close. People don't vanish in locked rooms, Evelyn. Not without help. She wouldn't meet my eyes. That told me more than her words ever could. I walked her out, but the silence she left behind clung to the wallpaper. It felt like the whole house was holding its breath. I lit a cigarette, let the smoke curl toward the ceiling and scanned the room again. That's when I found the smudge, on the inside of the window pane, faint but visible under the flashlight beam. Not from rain, not from dust. A fingerprint, which meant at some point someone had touched it from the inside after the storm had begun. But how? The room was still locked, the door still bolted, unless Cole himself had opened it. I crouched low, studying the old wood of the sill. Dust disturbed, but only slightly, like the window had been opened just once in years, and only for a moment. My gut told me the killer hadn't just walked into the room. He'd planned this, mapped it out, rehearsed it like theater, which meant the locked door wasn't the trick. The trick was making me believe it. I turned back to Cole's desk. His typewriter ribbon was missing. Strange. Writers guard their ribbons like priests guard their scriptures. It holds every word they've struck. Someone had taken it. Someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. And then in the back of the desk drawer, under a stack of bills and rejection letters, I found it. A torn sheet of paper. Half a page typed in uneven strokes. The words didn't make much sense. A jumble of sentences about betrayal and masks. But at the bottom was a single line that froze the blood in my veins. They already know the room isn't locked. I stared at it for a long time, the storm outside hammering harder than ever. If the room wasn't really locked, then what the hell was I looking at? That's when the phone rang. The phone on Cole's desk screamed into the night. Not my office line, not the precinct's, but the dead man's own telephone, still connected, still working. I hesitated before answering. Talking to the dead isn't something I make a habit of, but sometimes the living borrow their voices. I lifted the receiver, static, heavy breathing, and then a man's voice, shaky as glass, on the edge of a table. Detective Logan? I didn't ask how he knew I was there. Who's this? This is Mark Hastings, the publisher. His tone cracked like a bad violin string. I think someone's following me. I let the silence linger, let him sweat. That's so? You want to tell me why someone would bother following a publisher in the middle of a storm? Because of Cole's manuscript, he said. It wasn't just a book, Detective. He uncovered something. If it gets out, people like me, people with money, with reputations, will burn. The line went dead. I set the receiver down slow. Hastings had just painted a target on his own back, and I wasn't sure if he knew it. But before I could head to his office, I heard footsteps in the hallway again. I drew my piece, moved toward the sound, but the corridor was empty. Just shadows and rain beating against the roof. Except the Queen of Spades was gone. Someone had slipped into that room right under my nose and taken the card. I tracked Hastings down at his publishing house, a crooked building on the edge of downtown, where neon signs flickered like dying stars. He was waiting for me in his office, nervously chewing on a cigar that had never been lit. Papers covered his desk, contracts, bills, rejection slips. He looked less like a man of letters and more like a drowning man clinging to paper rafts. He poured a drink with trembling hands. Cole's last work, it wasn't fiction. It was an expose, names and dates, things that could ruin lives. He never told me where he kept the full draft, but he hinted it was hidden in plain sight. Hidden where? I asked. In his journals. He coded it. That's why someone took them. I let his words hang in the smoke between us. If what he said was true, Cole hadn't just been writing novels. He'd been keeping records. Records dangerous enough to kill for. I asked him about the Queen of Spades. His face went blank. He swore he didn't know, but there was something about the way his hand tightened around the glass, something in his eyes that said he wasn't giving me the whole story. Before I could press harder, the lights flickered, then a crash of glass from the hallway. I rushed out, gun drawn, but the corridor was empty, except for a single calling card. Not a queen this time, but a joker, folded neatly in half. I pocketed it, my gut tightening. Someone was playing a game, leaving me breadcrumbs made of paper and ink. And I didn't like being the one led by the leash. The next day I paid a visit to Samuel Dorsey, Cole's rival. He lived in a dingy apartment above a laundromat, the kind of place where ambition goes to rot. His typewriter clattered as I entered, but when he saw me, he froze. "Detective," he sneered. "Here to pin Cole's death on me. You'll have to do better than jealousy." I glanced at the stack of papers on his desk. Pages filled with words crossed out, rewritten, scribbled over. His bitterness bled through every line. "You tell me," I said. "Where were you last night?" "Here. Writing garbage that won't sell." He smirked. "Unlike Cole, I didn't have secrets worth killing for." "Funny thing," I said, pulling the torn page from Cole's desk out of my pocket. "This mean anything to you?" Dorsey read it, frowned. "Sounds like Cole. Always paranoid. But if he thought the room wasn't locked, maybe he was right. That caught me off guard." "You saying he staged his own killing?" Dorsey shrugged. "All I'm saying is Cole liked puzzles. Maybe he wanted his death to be one too." He chuckled, but his eyes betrayed something else. Fear. Fear of being dragged into a play he didn't audition for. When I left, I wasn't convinced he'd killed Cole, but I was convinced of one thing. He knew more than he was willing to share. By the time night fell again, the city felt heavier, like the storm had seeped into its bones. I went back to Cole's house, the crime scene still taped off, but abandoned by uniforms. Inside, the air was colder, emptier. I searched every corner, every crevice, and that's when I noticed the bookshelf, one volume out of place, an old dictionary, spine cracked. I opened it, and inside was a hollowed-out compartment, empty now, but once it could have hidden a stack of pages. Cole had been playing a game, leaving his manuscript where only the careful eye could find it. Someone had beaten me to it, and then I saw it. Another card, slipped between the pages. The Ace of Spades. The message was clear. Whoever I was chasing wasn't running. They were circling me. I took the card back to my office, spread the clues across my desk. The Queen, the Joker, the Ace. A pattern, maybe, or just a taunt. Either way, it told me one thing. This killer wanted me personally involved. I poured myself a drink, tried to think it through. Evelyn, the quiet neighbor who knew more than she said. Hastings, desperate and ruined, maybe willing to kill for survival. Dorsey, bitter, jealous, but too sloppy for a trick like this. And somewhere in the middle of them all, Henry Cole, a writer who'd locked himself in with his own secrets and paid the price. I leaned back, closed my eyes, but then I remembered the fingerprint on the window. I'd sent it to the lab earlier. The phone rang. "Detective Logan?" The text voice was tired. "We got your print back. It's not Cole's, it's Evelyn's." The neighbor. The trembling woman who swore she'd heard nothing. She'd been in that room. I hung up the phone, the pieces spinning like a roulette wheel in my mind. Evelyn in the room. Manuscripts missing, cards left behind, and a dead man who claimed the room wasn't locked. But what I didn't know then was that Evelyn wasn't just a neighbor. She was the key. And finding out why would take me deeper into the dark than I'd ever been before. The city doesn't sleep, but sometimes it pretends to. By the time I got to Evelyn's apartment, the streets outside were empty, except for the stray echoes of the storm draining into the gutters. Her place was across the hall from Cole's, a narrow box of peeling wallpaper and stale perfume. She opened the door slower than guilt, her face pale in the hallway light. "Detective," she whispered, as if saying the word might summon the devil himself. I didn't wait for an invitation. I walked in, brushed past her. The air smelled like damp roses and cigarette ash. On the table sat a deck of playing cards, neat and complete, except for 3 missing: the Queen of Spades, the Ace, the Joker. My pulse tightened. "You've been in Cole's room," I said, low, steady. "Fingerprint says so. Want to tell me why?" Her lips trembled. I heard something the night before. Voices through the wall. He wasn't alone. I knocked on his door, but he wouldn't open. Later, I let myself in. I thought maybe he needed help. "You found him?" I asked. She shook her head. "No. He was fine then, nervous. Said someone was after him. That he'd written something dangerous I didn't understand. I left." Her story bent but didn't break. But the deck of cards on the table, that was too perfect, too deliberate. Where are the missing cards, Evelyn? Her eyes darted to a drawer, quick as lightning. I opened it before she could protest. Inside were scraps of paper, torn notebook pages covered in Cole's handwriting, passages about betrayal, masks, and hidden rooms. My stomach turned. She had pieces of the manuscript. Why hide these? I pressed. I was scared, she whispered. I didn't want to be dragged into it. But Hastings came to see me, said I should hand over anything of Cole's. I refused. That's when I knew this was bigger than me. Hastings again. His name kept crawling back into the frame like an unwanted shadow. But if Evelyn had the cards and pieces of the manuscript, then someone else was feeding her fear. Someone who wanted me to think she was guilty. I left her shaking in her apartment, but not before warning her, if you're lying, I'll know. Back at my office, I spread the scraps on my desk. Words jumped out between the scrawls. Mask, stage, betrayal. The door is not what it seems. I lit a cigarette, stared through the smoke. Cole had left me a riddle and I was missing the punchline. That's when my office window rattled. A rock clattered against the glass. I looked down to the street, empty. Then I saw it. Taped to the rock was another playing card, the King of Spades. The set was nearly complete. Someone was escalating. I stepped back, instincts prickling. Whoever was out there knew where I worked, knew how to get close without being seen. And they wanted me to know I wasn't chasing them. They were chasing me. I had to act before they played their final card. I stormed into Hastings's office the next morning. He was there, hair slicked back with desperation, suit wrinkled. You've been pressuring Evelyn, I said. Looking for Cole's manuscript. Why? He didn't bother denying it. Because that manuscript is poison. Cole uncovered financial dealings, bribes, laundering, names of people who can't afford exposure. If the book surfaces, the whole city burns. I was trying to protect my business, that's all. Funny way of protecting, I muttered. Threatening a neighbor, chasing scraps of paper. His face went red. You don't understand, Detective. I didn't kill him. But the people he exposed, they'd do anything to bury this. And if you're not careful, they'll bury you too. I leaned in, close enough to smell his sweat. Then why the cards, Hastings? He blinked. What cards? Either he was lying or someone else was orchestrating this game. Either way, I was being pulled deeper into a theater of shadows. That night, I returned to Cole's house. Something kept dragging me back there like gravity. I searched the walls, the floorboards, the desk again, and then I saw it. A second lock on the study door, hidden beneath the bolt, disguised by layers of paint. Old, rusted, but functional. The door had two locks, one visible, one invisible, which meant the killer could have used a key I didn't know existed. The room wasn't locked at all. It only looked that way. Cole's note made sense now. The room isn't locked. But then why the cards? That's when I heard it. A whisper from behind me. I turned, gun raised. A figure stepped from the shadows, tall, hat pulled low. I couldn't see his face, but I could see what he held. Another card. The final piece. The King of Hearts. Detective, the voice rasped. You've been chasing the wrong story. I kept my aim steady. Then enlighten me. He tossed the card onto the desk. It fluttered down, face up. Cole wasn't killed for his words. He was killed for what he knew about me. I recognized the voice then. Dorsey, the rival. He grinned, sharp as broken glass. I followed him that night, watched him lock his own door, thought I'd never get in. But then he let Evelyn in, and I slipped through when she left. Simple as that. The room wasn't locked, it was never locked. He stepped closer, voice dropping. The manuscript was mine, Detective. He stole from me. Every idea, every line. I took back what was mine and I left him with his tricks. The barrel of my gun didn't waver, but my pulse did. And the cards? He chuckled. Cole and I used to play poker. Spades were always his favorite. I thought it poetic. The rain outside hammered harder, like the city itself was holding its breath. Dorsey was close enough now that I could smell the whiskey on his coat. He thought he'd outsmarted me, thought his confession was theater for an audience of one. But he hadn't noticed the shadow in the doorway. Evelyn. She stepped inside, pale but steady, a revolver in her shaking hands. He's lying, she said. Cole didn't steal from him. Dorsey's been obsessed for years, claiming everyone's words were his. He wanted to own Cole's death like he wanted to own his life. Dorsey turned, eyes narrowing. That moment of hesitation was all I needed. I lunged, disarmed him, slammed him against the desk. The King of Hearts slid to the floor, face down. I cuffed him as he spat curses, his arrogance shattering like glass on concrete. Back in the silence of the study, Evelyn looked at me with tired eyes. "Is it over?" I shook my head. With men like Dorsey, it's never over. But for tonight, the cards are off the table. I glanced at Cole's empty shelves, the missing journals, the half-finished manuscript scattered in scraps. The truth was buried somewhere in there, but not clean, not whole. Cole had taken secrets to the grave, and the city would keep bleeding ink long after this night ended. Still, one thing was clear. The locked room wasn't magic. It was a trick, and tricks are meant to be broken. The rain finally broke as I walked Dorsey down the station steps, his wrists cuffed, his mouth still running like a bad radio. He swore up and down that Cole had stolen from him, that the world owed him recognition. The officers shoved him into the back of the cruiser, but his voice still carried into the night. "You'll see, Detective, he wasn't innocent, none of us are." Maybe he was right. Maybe nobody's innocent in this city. But killing a man in cold blood doesn't make you the victim. It just makes you another shadow I have to drag into the light. Evelyn gave her statement. She was shaken but solid enough. She admitted to visiting Cole that night, admitted she'd stepped into his study when he seemed afraid, but swore she left before anything happened. Dorsey must have slipped in right after her. The invisible second lock had fooled everyone, made the scene look like an impossible puzzle. It was clever, I'll give him that. But cleverness doesn't cover up blood on your hands. Still, something didn't sit right. The cards, the manuscript, the missing pages Evelyn had hidden. When I got back to my office, I laid them out again. The Queen, the Ace, the Joker, the King. 4 cards from a deck, symbols in a game that was never really about poker. Cole had left them for me, maybe not directly, but in spirit. He knew someone would try to silence him, and he wanted me to know that the real story was bigger than a jealous rival. The scraps of manuscript Evelyn had kept were proof enough. Financial scandals, political corruption, names that carried weight in smoke-filled rooms. Hastings had downplayed it, called it poison. He wasn't lying. If Cole's full draft ever surfaced, the city would tremble. And yet, as I stared at the fragments, I knew the truth. Dorsey might have pulled the trigger, but he wasn't the only one with blood on his hands. Hastings had motive. Evelyn had fear. And whoever was named in those missing pages, they had power. Enough to make men disappear in locked rooms. The real locked room wasn't Cole's study. It was the city itself. Days passed, but the storm never left me. Dorsey confessed formally, claiming ownership of the crime like it was some twisted literary prize. Hastings kept his head down, trying to bury the scandal before it buried him. Evelyn packed her bags, left town, said she wanted to forget. Can't say I blamed her. The walls in that building had soaked up too much sorrow. But me? I kept digging. Couldn't help myself. The scraps of Cole's manuscript haunted me. Phrases looped in my head like broken records. Masks. Betrayal. The door is not what it seems. One night, I returned to Cole's house one last time. The police had cleared it, the crime tape flapping in the wind like forgotten streamers after a party no one enjoyed. The study was empty now, just dust and silence. But as I stood there, something caught my eye, a loose floorboard near the desk. I pried it up and there it was, another notebook, untouched. Cole's handwriting filled the pages, sharp and relentless. It wasn't the full manuscript, but it was enough. Enough to confirm Hastings' story. Enough to make me realize Cole had been playing a dangerous game. He'd been documenting every rotten deal, every backroom betrayal. He was going to publish it as fiction, but anyone with half a brain would read between the lines. I slid the notebook into my coat. Evidence, yes, but also a reminder. Some truths are too heavy for the world. They get locked away until someone strong enough, or foolish enough, decides to set them free. I sat back in my office that night, the city humming outside, the neon bleeding into the darkness. I poured myself a drink, Let the amber settle in the glass. The case was solved, at least on paper. Dorsey would rot behind bars. Evelyn would try to build a new life. Hastings would scramble to keep his empire afloat. And Cole was just another ghost added to my collection. But as a detective, I knew better. Cases don't end when the killer's cuffed. They end when the truth is too loud to ignore or too dangerous to tell. And this truth, it was still out there, buried in missing pages, locked in someone's drawer, waiting for the wrong or the right hands to find it. I picked up the Queen of Spades from my desk, turned it over in the lamplight. Maybe it was just a card, or maybe it was Cole's last message, a warning that the game wasn't over, not by a long shot. Outside, the rain started again, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the glass. The city never sleeps, and it never forgives. And me, I don't quit. Because when you live in a world of locked rooms, sometimes the only way out is to break the door yourself. I downed the whiskey, let the burn remind me I was still alive. Another case closed, another ghost on the ledger. And as I killed the light, I left the card on the desk, face up, daring the next shadow to make its move. The city would call again. It always does. And when it does, Detective Logan will answer.